My world was supposed to be filled with the scent of ink from my father's design studio, the soft sunlight streaming through wide glass windows, and the warmth of employees who worked with passion, not fear. That was the world I thought I inherited when my father died 2 years ago and left me his company, Atelier Lumière, the fashion house he built from nothing. But that illusion shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. It didn't happen suddenly, it began with cracks I ignored because love makes you blind. I was 29, a woman who had stepped into my father's shoes far earlier than I ever imagined. The responsibility was crushing, yet I carried it with pride because he had believed in me. And at my side, or so I thought, was Jeff Owen, my fiancé. Tall, polished heir to Apex Corporation, one of the country's most powerful conglomerates. His presence always drew eyes. His charm could fill a room, but behind those chiseled features lived a hunger that never seemed satisfied. My father had seen it long before I did. I can still hear his rasping voice on his hospital bed the last night of his life. "Lucy," he whispered, his hand trembling as it clasped mine. "Jeff is too ambitious. There's a hunger in his eyes that love cannot satisfy. Love can give us strength, but it can also blind us. Never lose yourself no matter what." I had kissed his hand and promised him I would be strong. And yet, blinded by love, I ignored his warning. I thought Jeff was my future, that together we could carry my father's dream even higher. How naive I was. I remember sitting across from Jeff in the conference room, the air thick with tension. He drummed his fingers against the polished table, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "Lucy, this merger is the best decision for both of us, for both companies." I leaned back, folding my arms, the weight of my father's legacy pressing against my chest. "The best decision for Apex, maybe. But Atelier Lumière isn't some failing business you can patch up. This company is the dream my father built from nothing. Our employees are like family. I won't let you turn it into one of your chess pieces." His eyes narrowed, though his lips curled into a faint smile. "You make it sound so bad. I'm telling you, it's a strategic partnership." The patronizing edge in his voice was new. Once he used to praise me, used to celebrate my vision. But now all he saw was a pawn blocking his ambitions, and for the first time I truly felt the distance growing between us. "This discussion is over," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded. "Atelier Lumière will remain independent. That's my decision, and it was my father's wish." Jeff fell silent. Then he exhaled a soft laugh, too calm, too deliberate. "Fine. If that's how you feel, maybe we should take a little break. Cool off." The chill that swept over me then was instinct warning me of a storm to come. But I didn't listen. That night, when I returned home, my younger sister Alyssa was waiting in the living room. She was 25, dreamy and impressionable, always chasing sparkles, always measuring herself against me. The perfect big sister. Her smile was warm, too warm. "Welcome back, Lucy. Look at this." She held up her phone, displaying photos of a tropical resort. "Jeff thought you've been working too hard, and with that design competition in Italy next week, he said you should relax a little before then. He arranged everything. An overseas trip, just like that." I should have been suspicious. But Alyssa's innocent smile and Jeff's sudden thoughtfulness disarmed me. And the competition, yes, that was important. Winning it could cement our company's place in the international market. Saying no wasn't an option. "Thanks, Alyssa. I'll think about it," I said, though unease lingered like a shadow. In the end, I went. I poured myself into the competition, shaking off the doubts. And I won. Standing on that stage in Italy holding the grand prize, my heart swelled with pride. I thought surely this would silence Jeff's merger talk. Surely now he'd see us differently. But pride turned to ashes the moment I stepped into my apartment upon returning home. The air carried a sweet vanilla scent I didn't recognize. My chest tightened as I walked through the hallway. Then I opened my closet and froze. My wedding dress, crafted from my late mother's lace, the most sacred thing I owned, was gone. Panic surged. My phone buzzed. It was Sandra, my best friend, a lawyer I trusted with my life. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Lucy, listen carefully. You need to sit down." Fear clawed at me. "What's wrong?" A pause. Then her words fell like knives. "Alyssa and Jeff got married yesterday. In your wedding dress." For a moment, everything inside me went silent. "No," I whispered. But Instagram told the truth. My hands shook as I scrolled, Alyssa radiant in my dress, Jeff beside her smiling smugly. A luxurious chapel, an extravagant reception laughter frozen in photographs that pierced me like shards of glass. And then Alyssa's post captioned as though twisting a blade into my chest, the moment we realized it was fate. Sorry, Lucy, but sometimes love and business don't wait. Love and business. That single word business clicked everything into place. The arranged trip, Alyssa's sudden sweetness, Jeff's coldness. It was never just about stealing my fiancé. Their goal was to take everything, my father's company, my legacy, my very soul. Rage boiled but then settled into something colder, heavier, a stillness that filled my bones. They thought I would collapse. They thought I would crumble and disappear. But they had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed again. Kevin, our loyal head of accounting, his name flashing with an urgent red icon. I answered, my voice low, steady. Lucy, he said, we have a problem. Jeff is demanding an emergency shareholders meeting. The agenda is your dismissal as CEO and a full merger with Apex. Of course. My laugh was hollow bitter. Kevin, stay calm. Everything is under control. Our counterattack starts now. That was the moment I stopped being the powerless woman who cried alone in the dark. That was the moment I became my father's daughter ready to fight. I called Sandra back. I don't have time to grieve. This is war. Her voice carried a spark I hadn't heard in weeks. I've been waiting for you to say that. Where do we start? First, hire the best IT investigator you can find. Someone with hacker roots. I need access to Jeff's laptop, his phone, Apex's servers, everything. Trace the money, track the lies. I don't care what it costs. I know just the person, she said. What else? The marriage, I replied, venom coating the word. They must have filed the paperwork by now. But if Jeff was still legally engaged to me... Sandra caught on instantly. It may not be bigamy, but it's a civil offense. Grounds for substantial damages. That could weaken his standing. I looked out the window into the night sky, my reflection staring back at me, unrecognizable. Jeff and Alyssa think they've already won. But they just started a game I'll finish. No rules, no mercy. That night, I pulled an old leather-bound journal and a black USB drive from my father's safe. His journal contained warnings pages filled with his suspicions about the Owen family. Reckless, ruthless destroyers rather than builders. If anything happens to me, he had written, know that Jeff carries that legacy in his blood. My final trump card is on this USB. I held the drive tightly, my heart pounding. I didn't have the password yet, but I would find it. Jeff, Alyssa, you took everything, but you underestimated me. The night after I discovered their betrayal, I sat alone in my study staring at my father's journal and the black USB drive like they were lifelines. The lamp cast a small circle of light, but the rest of the room felt suffocating in darkness. My father's words echoed in my head. Never lose yourself no matter what. My phone kept buzzing with calls and messages. Journalists, employees, even distant relatives pretending to check in. I ignored them all. I couldn't afford the luxury of breaking down. If I shattered everything my father had built would collapse with me. I ran my fingers over the leather cover of the journal, the ridges of ink pressed into the pages over years of his notes. He had known. He had seen through the Owen family's ambition long before I had. Why hadn't I listened? Was I so desperate for love that I ignored the red flags right in front of me? My thoughts kept circling back to Alyssa, my little sister. The girl who once begged me to braid her hair, who cried when she scraped her knees, who clung to me when thunder shook the house at night. How did she become this woman who could smile in my wedding dress, post my humiliation online and caption it as if fate had blessed her theft? Was it jealousy? Was it weakness? Or was it simply the intoxication of Jeff's promises? The rage inside me twisted with grief, forming something sharper, something colder. They had taken what was mine, but they hadn't destroyed me, not yet. Sandra's voice rang in my memory, calm but unyielding. This is war. And I was ready to fight. The next morning, the battlefield widened. I woke to headlines screaming across every news site. Rising star designer accused of embezzlement. Lucy Brown flees abroad. After sister marries. Fiancé. The articles were filled with sources, each detail crafted to paint me as a jealous, unstable woman, stealing from her own company out of spite. At the center of it all was Alyssa. She appeared in a video interview, her eyes glistening with perfectly timed tears, her voice trembling. My sister has always had to have everything. When she found out Jeff and I had feelings for each other, she couldn't handle it. I never imagined she would steal from the company. She looked fragile, pitiable, every word designed to twist the knife deeper. And there was Jeff beside her, holding her gently, his expression sculpted into the role of the tragic protector. Together they painted me as a villain, and the world believed them. The comment sections boiled with venom. Homewrecker. Disgrace. Ungrateful daughter. By noon, the company phones were in chaos. Partnerships terminated. Banks revisited our loans. Employees, frightened and uncertain, demanded answers. My name, once tied to talent and promise, was now synonymous with scandal. I shut myself in my office, the portrait of my father watching silently from the wall. For the first time, despair wrapped around me like a vice. Maybe this was the end. Maybe Jeff and Alyssa had won. My father's dream crushed under their greed. A knock at the door broke through the silence. It was Kevin, our head of accounting. His hair was graying, his shoulders stooped from decades of work, but his eyes were steady, unwavering. He held a thick file in his hands. "Please," he said softly, "don't carry this alone. We believed in your father, and we believe in you." He placed the file on my desk and opened it. Pages of accounting records meticulously organized, each marked with red tabs. "Look here," he said, pointing. Jeff signed multiple consulting contracts over the past month, over $500,000. But the firms don't exist. They're shell companies. The money's being funneled into private accounts used to buy Atelier Lumière shares. He's stealing from us to take us over. For a moment, my breath caught. My father's company, my inheritance, our employees' livelihoods. Jeff had turned all of it into his weapon. "Kevin," I whispered, my throat tight, "this is exactly what we need. This is proof." He met my gaze with quiet resolve. "We'll fight with you. Until the end. That's a promise I made to your father." Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. That night, Sandra called with more news. "Lucy, the investigator's in. His code name is Zero. Former White Hat hacker, now private consultant. He's already inside Apex Corporation servers." My heart pounded as I listened, and Sandra's voice carried a thrill of triumph. "He's found something. The Owen family is drowning in debt. Reckless investments, failed ventures, the banks cutting them off. That's why they're so desperate to take Atelier Lumière. Your company's assets are their lifeline." It made sense. Every manipulation, every betrayal, every lie. They weren't just stealing Jeff's love or my dignity, they were fighting for survival. My family's legacy was their last chance. But then Sandra's tone darkened. "There's more. Zero intercepted an Apex board meeting. You need to hear this." She sent the file, and when I pressed play, Jeff's voice filled the room. "The Lumière acquisition is proceeding on schedule. Lucy's probably still dreaming in Italy. By the time she comes back, she'll have no place left." Then another voice, his father's, gruff and commanding. "Don't mess this up, Jeff. That company is our last lifeline. Do you have any idea how hard it was to remove Lucy's father, that stubborn old man?" My blood ran cold. Jeff's voice again, casual, chilling. "I know, Dad. He conveniently dropped dead from overwork. His daughter will follow the same fate if she resists." The room spun. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. My father's death, it hadn't been natural. It hadn't been fate. They had planned it. They had killed him. Sandra's voice wavered through the phone. "Lucy, this is bigger than we thought. This isn't just corporate crime. This is murder. We should call the police." I swallowed hard, my entire body trembling. "Not yet. If we move too soon, they'll cover it up. We need something bigger. We need to end them completely, legally, socially, financially." And Alyssa was tangled in this web too. She had betrayed me, yes, but she was also a pawn. Jeff would discard her the moment she ceased to be useful. I couldn't let her drag me down again, but I also couldn't watch her be destroyed. My fists clenched. "We'll gather everything, every crime, every lie, and when the time comes, they won't just lose, they'll be annihilated." That was the night the war truly began. The war I had promised began not with fireworks or a dramatic public confrontation, but in quiet surgical moves made in the dark. We were stealthy, patient. Zero, my hacker with a ghostly name, dug into Apex's servers with the care of a surgeon and the hunger of a predator. He found the paper trails that men like Jeff and his father thought they'd buried under shell companies and whispered promises. I read each line until the words blurred: shell consulting contracts, fake invoices, money siphoned to accounts and names that meant nothing to anyone but those who knew how to hide in plain sight. Every discovery felt like a stitch being pulled tight, sewing a case that would leave Jeff exposed and naked under the bright lights he preferred. At the same time, Sandra moved through the legal world like wind through grass, soft, inevitable, and impossible to stop. She didn't just file papers, she repaired trust where it had been ripped. She approached Kelly, Alyssa's friend, with patience and care, not accusation. It was the only way to reach my sister. The truth had to come to her, not from my lips, which she would never trust right away, but from someone who could peel back the false story Jeff had painted. Kelly's shock, dissolving into confusion to horror. When Sandra and I fed her the audio, became the pivot that turned Alyssa from a co-conspirator into a witness. She couldn't unsee the messages, the bank statements, the recordings of Jeff speaking with his father as if discussing cattle, not people. Alyssa's awakening wasn't cinematic. It was ragged and private. I remember the day she stepped into my office. No glitter, no camera-ready hair, only a woman who had been pushed and used and finally felt the teeth of betrayal against her own throat. Her eyes were rimmed red with crying, but there was something in them I had not seen in years: recognition. She heard Jeff's own voice in the recording, the banal, practiced cruelty, when he and his father discussed removing my father and using her like a prop. She listened to the file Sandra had sent that played the Owen boardroom like a confession. For a long while she sat in silence, as if the words were corrosive acid in her mouth. Then she looked up and whispered, "I didn't know." I wanted to hate her in that moment. My ribs wanted to crush her into the floor and squeeze every lie from her. Instead, I felt something else, a hollow ache that had room for another human broken by cleverer monsters than us. I could have let her fall. Instead, I held out my hand. That choice was not weakness. It was a strategy and a moral test. If I could hoist Alyssa to the truth and have her stand in the light with us, the entire house of cards would collapse faster. Sandra arranged safe passage. Kelly ferried Alyssa to a place where Jeff couldn't find her. She stayed there under the shield of anonymity while Sandra prepared the legal scaffolding to turn Alyssa from co-conspirator into client and witness. Meanwhile, Kevin and the team worked like possessed archivists, aligning accounting threads so cleanly that even a casual reader would vomit at the obscene greed in those numbers. Employees, my real family, the people my father had always said were the soul of Atelier Lumière, gathered in small groups, nervous, uncertain. I called a meeting in the main atelier. There was no pomp. I stood before them, hands unclasped, voice steady, but full of the salt of late nights. I told them everything I could say, without tipping our hand. Rumors were not truth. Contracts were being manipulated. Their livelihoods were on the line because one man wanted to steal the life my father had built. One by one, faces hardened. A young designer who had started as an intern raised his hand and said, "We stand with you." In that room, the company stopped being a ledger and became a cause. The warmth of that solidarity pressed against the cold logic of Jeff's takeover, like light against shadow. As the emergency shareholders meeting approached, we had to thread delicate needles. Timing was everything. If we moved too early, Jeff's camp would spin a narrative. If we waited too long, they could call votes, seize momentum. Zero and Sandra coordinated like generals. Zero unearthed an offshore account in Alyssa's name planted by Jeff, and the chat logs proving Apex's contract for industrial spies to steal our unreleased designs. Our case no longer fit on some boardroom table. It played like a crime opera before the people who mattered most, the shareholders and the auditors. We had Kevin's ledgers, Zero's digital fingerprints, Sandra's legal motions, and crucially, the USB my father had hidden away like a talisman. Between them, the truth would form a noose. On the day of the meeting, the hotel hall felt like an arena. Jeff gloated in public, paper-thin charm tightened around his mouth. His father, already trembling under the cost of their years of reckless bets, sat like a man seeing his empire turn to sand. I walked in wearing my father's resolve more than any suit. The room smelled of stale ambition and warm perfume. Cameras flashed like small suns. Jeff opened the play with the practiced theatrics of a man used to being adored. He spoke of betrayal, of embezzlement, of a beloved company in ruins because its leader had fled. He expected his applause. He expected my absence to be the final blow. Instead, I stood. I walked down the aisle toward the microphone as if I were stepping into the center of a storm I had waited my life to weather. The room tilted toward me, curiosity and contempt, and for a few hope. Sandra and I began to dismantle the lie like two craftsmen undoing a rope's twist. Kevin's ledgers scrolled onto the screens. Zero's evidence clicked into place. The external auditor, Mike Quiet, unassuming, the kind of man whose integrity never needed preening, joined with a remote confirmation. Jeff had taken over $5 million from Apex for his own leverage. We played the audio of the Owen boardroom. Jeff's father's voice was a rasping map of their greed. The Lumiere acquisition is proceeding. She'll have no place left. Jeff's own words, casual, chilling, followed. The smell of shock was metallic and sweet in the air. And then, with the room already reeling, we did what would finish them. Sandra cued the USB my father had left, and his face filled the screen. He spoke to me across the years, his voice weary but unbroken. He detailed a secret agreement, an old confidential contract with Apex's founder, that guaranteed Atelier Lumiere's independence, declaring that any attempt to steal the company voided Apex's claims and activated a cascade of legal consequences. The room changed from theater to courtroom, from spectacle to the scale of justice. Mike's face was unreadable but grave. We were not merely exposing theft. We were revealing a conspiracy that had cost my father his life. When Alyssa stepped out, trembling but upright, and Sandra announced she was our client pressing charges for coercion and fraud, the final dominoes fell. Jeff's facade crumbled in real time. The chairman's color left his face. Applause that had once been manufactured for Jeff now rose for me, not because I wanted it, but because the truth had earned it. Officers in uniform stood at the entrance as if summoned by gravity. Jeff was escorted out, mouth opening in a last hysteric threat, words about my father that tried to wound me even as the iron of justice closed. He was questioned, charged, cuffed. His father faced scrutiny that would ruin any hope of rehabilitation. Apex's allies abandoned ship like rats. But victory did not feel like triumph at first. It felt hollow and raw, like rising from a battlefield and discovering the wreckage. The press pivoted quickly. Stories of my return became headlines. Yet the loud voices in the press could not erase the ache the accusations had left in me. The question Jeff hissed about my father's death hung like a splinter in my heart. Even as the legal machinery turned, I needed the one last thing the USB had promised, not only evidence, but my father's voice. He had left me more than a contract. He had left words of care and the map of the man I should become. In his video, he had called me strong and warned me against letting revenge become my center. He had given me the final legal proof and also the moral compass. After the meeting, in the quiet of my office with Kevin and Sandra and Zero surrounding me like a ragged shield, I let myself cry. Not the shrill, cried-out sob of the first betrayal, but something deeper, a clean, exhausted break. My team sat with me, not rushing, not pitying. They had watched a company on the verge of being consumed by predators, and they had stood up for it. We were bruised but intact. I understood then that my father's legacy was not only the label or the ledger, but these people who kept faith when the world spun. Alyssa's role shifted in the public story from co-conspirator to witness to someone trying to atone. Her apology was clumsy at first, then honest. She began working with Sandra, learning to understand coercion and manipulation, and how to rebuild a life without the glitter of being someone's trophy. I didn't forgive her that night or the next. Forgiveness takes time. But we started repairing the wreckage in small ways: a call, a safe meeting, a joint appearance where she testified truthfully. Watching her stand and tell the world what had been done to her, how Jeff lied, how he used her timeline and her vanity to hide something darker, was both painful and oddly liberating. It made clear that she had been both perpetrator and victim in a way I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Weeks later, with Apex's collapse underway and the legal suits piling like winter snow against their doors, Atelier Lumiere breathed. We rebuilt with the ferocity of people who had almost lost everything. New designs bloomed from the pain, sharp, honest, irreverent. Mike, quietly brilliant and steady, became a partner in rebuilding, and slowly someone whose presence thawed the icy hollows left by betrayal. In the long nights we worked together, strategy after strategy, his hand would find mine across the table, and I'd feel a warmth that wasn't a patch for what had been lost, but an honest ember of something real. But even as we cleaned up the public wreckage, the private ache remained. My father's last gift had saved the company, but it could not turn back the hands that had opened his chest and taken what they wanted. There would be no simple closure, no tidy, moral tidy-up. Justice would be served, but the scars would remain. Still in the quiet after the storm, I understood something essential. I had been forged by those losses into someone capable of protecting what mattered without losing herself to the same hunger that had tried to consume us. In the days after the shareholder meeting, the silence inside Atelier Lumiere felt heavier than the applause had. Outwardly, we had won. Jeff was in custody. Apex was unraveling, and my employees rallied with a loyalty that could not be bought. Yet victory carried a strange aftertaste. I would walk through the atelier and see my father's reflection everywhere, in the way the sewing machines hummed like a chorus, in the sketches pinned to the walls, in the faces of the people he had called family. I felt his presence and his absence all at once, like a ghost pressing against my shoulders. Justice had been served, but grief was still raw. I hadn't just lost a fiancé or a sister's trust. I had lost time, innocence, and the easy faith I once carried in the word family. Alyssa came to me weeks later, her steps hesitant. She was stripped of the glitter she used to cloak herself in. Now she wore a plain suit, her hair tied back, her eyes clouded but clearer than I had ever seen. She bowed low, her voice trembling. "Lucy, I am so sorry. I couldn't see the truth. I let my jealousy and his promises blind me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at her for a long time. My chest ached with the memory of betrayal, but also with the flicker of the girl who once clung to me during storms. "Your life is still ahead of you," I said quietly. "Make it count." From then on, she apprenticed under Sandra, determined to help others avoid the traps that had nearly destroyed her. Perhaps that was her way of atonement. Perhaps with time she would learn what true strength meant. Jeff's sentence was heavy: embezzlement, fraud, coercion, even indirect involvement in my father's death. 15 years. He screamed in court, insisting he was the victim, but no one believed him anymore. Even his father abandoned him. Apex collapsed like a house of cards, debts and lawsuits tearing apart whatever empire they had pretended to hold. Atelier Lumiere, however, rose from the ashes. The scandal had thrown us into the spotlight, but instead of cowering my team, and I harnessed it. Our designs spoke louder than the rumors ever had, bold, uncompromising, born of pain, but infused with pride. We showed the world that betrayal could not silence creation. And through it all, Mike, the external auditor who had risked his career to expose the Owens, stayed by my side. At first, he was only a colleague, then a confidant, and slowly something more. His calm steadiness filled the empty spaces left by deceit. One night, as we left the office after another late strategy session, he turned to me and said, "Lucy, you're one of the strongest people I've ever known." I shook my head, whispering no. I was terrified every step of the way. He smiled gently. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to fight anyway." And you did. In his warmth, I felt the ice inside me begin to melt. A year later, we stood together at my father's grave, fresh flowers resting against the stone. I whispered, "Dad, I did it. I protected your company, just like you taught me to protect what matters most." The wind rustled the trees, and I imagined his voice answering, "Well done, my girl." I had once thought I lost everything, my fiancé, my sister, my reputation. But what I truly lost were only illusions. The illusion of love, the illusion of trust that was never real. From that darkness, I found something more valuable: the legacy of my father, the loyalty of those who believed in me, and the courage to rise when the world tried to break me. Revenge alone can destroy, but a battle fought to protect what you love can create something stronger. That was the lesson my scars carved into me. My real life didn't end with betrayal, it began the day I chose to rise. If my story touched you, if it made you think about betrayal, resilience, or the strength it takes to fight for what matters, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs courage and subscribe for more stories like this. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my place?